Good evening to all law students and legal professionals who have joined with us in this webinar lecture series presented by Legal Trendsetter on 26 January by Aman sir. Aman sir is a practicing lawyer, have been called to the bar in 1992. He is an advocate on record at the Supreme Court of India and argued cases diverse filed on law before the Supreme Court, including various high court tribunals in the country. Several of the cases has been reported and have led to change the law. Sir has been impaneled by the Supreme Court Service Committee as a legal aid counsel and has been appointed for pro bono work on the behalf of the disadvantaged section of the society lacking access to the court. Now, I will request to sir to join this session.
Thank you very much, and a very happy Republic Day to all of you. Uh, Today's topic is reflections on the secular tradition in our republic, which takes us to what is the meaning of secularism in our constitution. Let me start by quoting the first Vice President of India, the second President, Dr. Radhakrishnan, who said, according to his view of what we mean when we say India is a secular state. According to him, when India is said to be a secular state, and I quote him, the Indian state will not identify itself with or be controlled by any particular religion. We hold that no one religion should be given preferential status or unique distinction, that no one religion should be accorded special privileges in national life or international relations, for that would be a violation of the basic principles of democracy and contrary to the best interests of religion and government. This view of religious impartiality, of comprehension and forbearance has a prophetic role to play within the national and international life. No group of citizens shall arrogate to itself rights and privileges which it denies to others. No person should suffer from any form of disability or discrimination because of his religion, but all alike should be free to share to the fullest degree in the common life. Now, this was a quote by, as I pointed out, by the second president of India as to what the founding fathers thought of the kind of state India should be. The word secularism was, of course, inserted by the 42nd Amendment in 1976 in the preamble, but that did not mean India was not a secular state prior to that. We had several provisions right from the commencement of the Constitution in 1950, which show that India was always considered or meant to be a secular democratic republic. You have articles, since you're all law students and mainly people from law, you are familiar with Articles 25 to 28, which guarantee the right to freedom of religion. You're aware that these provisions are supplemented by other provisions in Article 15, Clause 1 and 2, Article 16, Clause 2, Article 29, Clause 2, Article 325. All these articles prevent discrimination in different matters on the basis of religion. You're probably also aware of Article 30, which grants special rights to religious minorities. So you had these provisions in the Constitution. You also had a long line of judgments of the Supreme Court emphasizing the secular nature of the Indian state prior to 1976, prior to the insertion of the word secularism in the preamble. For instance, you have the 1974 judgment, the 9 judgment decision of the Supreme Court in St. Xavier's College Society's case, which emphasized that as far as secularism means, it eliminates God from the matters of state. It ensures that no one shall be discriminated on the ground of religion. Again, in Indira Gandhi versus Rajnarai in 1975, the Supreme Court emphasized that the state shall have no religion of its own, and all persons shall be equally entitled to freedom of conscience and right to freely practice and propagate religion. And the reason for this was given by the Supreme Court in its decision in Ziauddin Bukhari's case, again 1975, where the Supreme Court said that our constitution makers certainly intended to set up a secular democratic republic, and that no democratic political and social order can survive or can endure without an agreement on the basic essentials which could unite and hold the citizens together despite differences in religion, race, caste, community, culture, creed, language. So, according to the Supreme Court in this case, it is important that the entire history, political history, has made it necessary that these differences, which generate powerful emotions, depriving people of the power of rational thought and action, should not be permitted to be exploited. Otherwise, the democratic freedoms themselves are going to be disturbed. So, according to the Supreme Court, the preamble listed out the objectives. To achieve those objects, there has to be something which is unifying, and that would be one of those things would be a secular state. So, all this was before the 1976 insertion in the preamble. Of course, later on, you have S.R. Bomai's case of 1994, which said that secularism is a basic structure of a constitution. The court referred to several articles which prohibit the state from identifying with any particular religion, sect, or denomination. And court also emphasized that the constitution does not recognize or it does not permit mixing religion with state power. Both have to be kept separate. According to the court, that's a constitutional injunction. So, as far as there is a constitution of India, you cannot introduce religion into politics because that would, according to the Supreme Court and our court, it would introduce an impermissible element in the body politic and an imbalance in a constitutional system. So, in fact, the Supreme Court goes on to say, under our constitution, no political party or organization can simultaneously be a political party and a religious party. You can't intermix politics and religion, according to Bomai's case. Of course, you had the controversial case of 1995 of Dr. Ramesh Prabhu, um, which there were certain loose observations, not actually necessary for the decision of that case, which related, we talked about Hindutva or Hinduism to be indicative more of a way of life of Indian people and not confined merely to the Hindu religion as a faith. This judgment, of course, has been commented upon and further clarifications has been given by the recent seven-judge decision of the Supreme Court in Abhiram Singh versus Komachand. This was the 2017 judgment. And many, again, this in this judgment also, the seven judges of the Supreme Court have emphasized that under the constitutional scheme, one cannot mix religion with state power. And on the other hand, the freedom to practice, profess, propagate religion of one's choice is guaranteed. So, this, broadly speaking, is the concept of secularism as far as India is concerned. It may have different meanings, different connotations in different countries. But as far as India is concerned, under the Indian constitution, this is broadly the concept of secularism. But when we talk about this concept of secularism, which basically means religious toleration, coexistence, was this tradition there in undivided India? Because if you're looking at secular traditions in our republic, the geographical territory of the subcontinent, did we have a secular tradition? Now, according to there's authority of the Supreme Court which says we did. That judgment is a 1962 constitutional bench decision of the Supreme Court, Saifuddin Sahib versus State of Bombay, which emphasized, which referred to several provisions, including Article 25, 26, freedom of religion, for instance, to say that these provisions embody, and if I quote the Supreme Court, according to the Constitution Bench, these provisions embody the principle of religious toleration that has been characteristic of Indian civilization from the start of history. The instances and periods when this feature was absent being merely temporary aberrations. So, according to the Supreme Court, Indian civilization, right from as from the start of history, has always been religiously tolerant. May have had periods of religious persecutions in between, but then eventually they became an aberration. But that is as far as what the court says. Let us see, let us examine this from what is the general perception. And let me start with the court. Um, the gentleman who said this says that the relationship of various communities living in this region cannot be cast in black and white. It lies in a gray area. There have been long periods in the history of the subcontinent when Muslims and Hindus have lived peacefully. The beautiful arches with elaborate motifs, delicate stone masonry, slender marble columns, rich calligraphy, well designed gardens, elaborate foundations, and ornate palaces are also characteristic of historic fusion of Indo Muslim culture. The Muslim architecture came in contact with Indian architecture, resulting in new Indo Muslim architecture. Sufi music is also marked by the synthesis that was initiated under Amir Khusro's auspices between Indo-Islamic musical traditions, which have grown steadily, thus producing a lasting feeling of cultural kinship between major communities of the subcontinent, irrespective of religion. Now, this quote is not by an academic, it's not by a historian, it's not even by an Indian. This quote is by Pakistan's former Foreign Minister Khurshid Mahmood Kasuri in his book released in late 2015, Neither a Hawk Nor a Dove. So, Pakistan's foreign, former foreign minister goes on to say it must be understood and emphasized that cultural fusion was not restricted to the arts in the subcontinent. Rather, it touched almost every aspect of a person's life. An astute understanding of South Asian history includes understanding all the features of a person's life that this culture has influenced. Meat and vegetable dishes, rice and pudding were all part of Indo Muslim culture, and so for scents, jewelry designs, most of all to traditions of romance, poetry, plays, and musical instruments. Kasuri goes on to emphasize that even a few miles apart, you might find different sets of dialect, customs, cultures, religion, traditions, but these are all organically bound, is the word he uses. And he romanticizes the fusion of Indo Muslim culture by saying that the people of the subcontinent are united by the shared experiences of being burnt by the summer sun, the sheer joy of the monsoon rains breaking the summer heat, and the memories of foreign invasions. Many geographical occurrences are particular to South Asia. Rain is a discomfort in many parts of the Western world. In South Asia, it causes the land to acquire life of its own, and it is a season to celebrate. Poets and musicians generate a string of melodies about the magic of rainfall. The elderly order streaming cups of chai, and those obliged to stay indoors gaze dolefully out of the windows, wishing to be part of celebrations, while stunned foreigners gape at the locals, taken aback by the extent of their elation. And Kusuri, of course, goes on to talk about the common food, common passion for qawwalis, the ragas, musical instruments like harmonium, tabla, dholak, similar cinematic themes, love for the same sports, hockey, cricket across the subcontinent. Now, this Pakistani view, captured by the former foreign minister, is very similar to what Maulana Abdul Kalam Azad had said in 1940 in his presidential address at the Congress session, where Maulana Azad had said, "It is India's historic destiny that many," and I'm quoting from him from his speech, "it was India's historic destiny that many human races and cultures should flow to her, finding a home in a hospitable soil, and that many a caravan should rest here. 1100 years of common history of Islam and Hinduism have enriched India with our common achievements. Our languages, our poetry, our literature, our culture, our art, our dress, our manners and customs, the innumerable happenings in our daily life, everything bears the stamp of a joint endeavor. These 1,000 years of a joint life has molded us into a common nationality. Whether we like it or not, we have become an Indian nation, united and indivisible. No fantasy or artificial scheming to separate and divide can break this unity. Now, Maulana Azad said this in 1940, the same year when Jinnah declared the two nation theory at Minto Park at Lahore. For those who are not familiar with the two nation theory, I'm sure everybody in the subcontinent is, but should somebody not be familiar, this theory basically felt that or propounded that if you have a democratic constitution, Muslims in undivided India would be a minority and would suffer domination by the Hindu community. And hence, according to this theory, Hindus and Muslims are separate nations, have different beliefs, thoughts, cultures, way of life, and are entitled to have separate homelands so that no one community or one nation dominates the other. So this is basically premised on an apprehension that Muslims would be that once the British leave, the British or the colonial masters, once they leave the subcontinent, the power gets transferred to Indian hands. If you have a democratic constitution, Hindu domination would be foisted on Indian Muslims. Gandhi had dismissed this concept of two nation theory. As early in 1908, he had written in Hind Swaraj, and if I quote him, India cannot cease to be one nation because many people belonging to different religions live in it. In no part of the world are one nationality and one religion synonymous terms, nor has it been so in India. In Harijan, on 28th of October 1939, Gandhi wrote, and I quote him again, why is India not one nation? Was it not one during, say, the Mughal period? If it is, why only two? Are not Christians a third, Parsis a fourth, and so on? Are Muslims of China a separate nation from the other Chinese? Are the Muslims of England a different nation from the other English? How are the Muslims of Punjab different from Hindus and Sikhs? Are they not all Punjabis drinking from the same water, breathing the same air, and deriving sustenance from the same soil? What is there to prevent them from following their respective religious practice? Are Muslims all over the world a separate nation? Are the Muslims of India only to be a separate nation distinct from the others? Again in 1980, he asserted, in 1940, Gandhi asserted that the two nation theory is an untruth. The vast majority of Muslims in India are converts to Islam or are descendants of Islam. They did not become a separate nation as soon as they became converts. A Bengali Muslim speaks the same tongue as a Bengali Hindu, eats the same food, has the same amusements as his Hindu neighbor. They dress alike. In fact, he says, when I first met Jinnah, I did not know he was a Muslim. I came to know his religion when I had his full name given to me. His nationality was written on his face and manner. Accordingly, Gandhi, in fact, wrote to Jinnah. He gave an open letter on 15 September 1944, where he said, I find no parallel in history for a body of converts and their descendants claiming to be a nation apart from a parent stock. If India was one nation before the advent of Islam, it must remain so, it must remain one in spite of the change of faith of a very large body of her children. You seem to have introduced a new test of nationhood. And Gandhi's views were well known. According to him, it's worse than anarchy to partition a poor country like India, whose every corner is populated by Hindus and Muslims living side by side. It is like cutting up a living body into pieces. So that was a view and a very robust argument put forth by Gandhi to say why two nation theory was an untruth. And it was an untruth. And the reason for that can be easily seen by facts which are documented. To start with, let us see who was demanding two nation theory. If we see the person to whom two nation theory is attributed, the father of two nation theory, he is a very highly respected Muslim leader, Sayyid Ahmad Khan, whose forefathers was in the Mughal courts. He was a Muslim nobility and considered very close to the British. Now, according to Wali Khan in his book Facts Are Facts: Untold Story of India's Partition, this gentleman, who was supposedly the father of the two nation theory, had declared in a function in Gurdaspur on 27 January 1884. And if I quote what he has said, we Hindus and Mohammedans should try to become one heart and soul and act in unison, act in union. In old historical books and traditions you will have read and heard, we see it even now, that all the people inhabiting one country are designated by the term one nation. The different tribes of Afghanistan are termed one nation, and so the miscellaneous hordes of people in Iran distinguished by the term Persians, though abounding in variety of thoughts and religions, are still known as members of one nation. Remember that words Hindu and Mohammedan are only means for religious distinction. Otherwise, all persons, whether Hindus or Mohammedans, even the Christians who reside in the country, are all in this particular respect belonging to one and the same nation. This is the person who is attributed to be the founder of the two nation theory. Why these thoughts change, we'll come to that in a minute, but let us see. But Sayyid Ahmad Khan is the one who had great influence on those who founded Pakistan, whether it was Iqbal or whether it was Jinnah. As far as Iqbal is concerned, we in India, millions of Indians, even today, hum his poetry. Sare Jahan Se Acha. He was a Punjabi leader, Urdu poet. And is in his own poetry, there are lines which says, मजहब नहीं सिखाता आपस में बैर रखना हिंदी है हम वतन है हिंदुस्तान हमारा, which can be translated as religion does not teach us to begrudge each other. We are Hindi and our nation is Hindustan. He is the founder of Pakistan. Coming to Jinnah. Jinnah, for the first 30 years of his political career, was fighting for Hindu-Muslim unity. Sarojini Naidu described him as ambassador of Hindu-Muslim unity for the Lucknow Pact of 1916. He is the one who went dismissing Pakistan as an impractical idea when suggested in the pamphlet circulated by Rahmat Ali in 1933 at Cambridge at the Round Table Conference. He even told the then Viceroy, Linlithgow, in 1938, that I prefer my own ideas how to maintain a recognizable equipoise between the communities to any carving up of the city or carving up of the country. He was not even a practicing Muslim. The anecdote goes that when he invited the Mountbattens to Karachi upon the establishment of Pakistan on 14th August 1947, he had ordered an official lunch. Since he did not practice Islam, he forgot that lunch had fallen in the month of Ramzan, during which Muslims fast from dawn to sunset. That lunch had to be changed to a dinner party at the last minute. He himself was not a practicing Muslim. He himself had, and he's a person who was mouthing the two nation theory. In fact, 3 days before, that is on 11th August 1947, if you see the speech Jinnah gave at the Constituent Assembly set up for the future Pakistan, He, in fact, rejected the two nation theory. I can quote from his speech. He said, "You are free. You are free to go to your temples. You are free to go to your mosques and to any other place of worship in this state of Pakistan. You may belong to any religion or caste or creed that has nothing to do with the business of the state." See the definition of secularism in the Indian constitution, that state has no religion. You can't mix religion with politics. So Jinnah says, you may belong to any religion or caste or creed that has nothing to do with the business of the state. We are starting in the days where there is no discrimination, no distinction between one community and another, no discrimination between one caste or creed and another. We are starting with this fundamental principle that we all are citizens and equal citizens of one state. Now I think we should keep that in front of us as our ideal, and you will find that in course of time, Hindus would cease to be Hindus and Muslims would cease to be Muslims, not in the religious sense, because that is the personal faith of each individual, but in the political sense as citizens of the state. That is precisely the concept of secularism in as far as the Indian constitution is concerned. So the individuals who were insisting on two nation theory, who got the subcontinent partitioned on the basis of two nation theory, created Pakistan, themselves at some point or the other had subscribed to the secular ideals which was there in the Constitution of India. So did partition make sense? Why did we have partition? We'll explore that in a bit. But even otherwise, not many of us actually sit down to think about. Most of us are post-partition generation. All of us would be now post-partition generation. But have you ever evaluated why that did even partition accord to common sense? I mentioned earlier that the premise of partition was that in a democratic constitution, the proponents of the two nation theory were saying that Indian Muslims, because they are a minority, will be subject to Hindu domination and hence they're entitled to a separate homeland. Now, it is well known, has been documented and even recorded by Kasuri in his book, that the core leadership of the supposedly Pakistan movement came from the Mohammedan Anglo-Oriental College, later renamed as Aligarh Muslim University, which had been set up by Syed Ahmad Khan in 1875. The Pakistan movement was stronger in provinces like United Provinces, Bihar, central provinces, Bihar, Berar, Bombay, where Muslims were in a minority, and not in provinces where Muslims were a majority, and that eventually became Pakistan. So the implication of this is Pakistan was foisted on Muslim majority provinces, Northwest Frontier Province, for instance, Sindh. Pakistan was foisted on Muslim majority provinces that did not fear Hindu domination under democratic constitution, where Muslims were minority, 22, 25, or 30 million Muslims at that point of time, where they were living in Muslim minority provinces. They were supposed to be part of India anyways. So the irony of the situation is that the Muslim majority provinces, where there was no question of any insecurity, became Pakistan. And for those Muslims who supposedly felt insecure, they were told by Jinnah in his speech in the Pakistan's Constituent Assembly, which is on 11th August 1947, that is too bad. You must now remain loyal citizens of India. So it just didn't make sense. That is the reason why partition is not of Hindus and Muslims. Partition of India has been called to be partition of Muslims and Muslims. If many other authors have commented on the partition scheme, and said that even Indian Muslims do not want partition. The Muslim sentiment was the precursor of which was the Mughal rule, that there were huge symbols, magnificent symbols of Taj Mahal, the Red Fort in Agra, in Delhi, the heartland of India like Lucknow. Mughals, the Muslim presence was throughout the subcontinent. They did not want to be isolated in pockets on the east and west. In fact, for most Muslims, the Pakistan scene seemed to be defeatist. Muslims were maybe a minority, but they were a substantial minority. And coupled with the fact there were other communities like Christianities, those professing faith in Christianity, Sikhism, Jainism, Buddhism, the Muslim population in undivided India could still command a lot, could still hold on its own. There was no need for a partition. And then there were segments of Muslim population like weavers who had the markets. They did not want partition and be uprooted again. And the, and again, if you think about it, this two nation theory was made applicable only to the British provinces. As of 1947, about 55% of the subcontinent were British provinces that were controlled directly by the British. Following the First War of Independence in 1857, the British had from 1858 declared that we will not annex more territory. At that point of time, about 45% of the subcontinent was not annexed. These were about 560 odd princely Indian states. Jammu and Kashmir was one of those states. Hyderabad was one of those states. Junagadh was there. So you had princely states would have their own rulers. And that the British scheme was that these rulers should owe the external allegiance to the British crown. They could retain the kingdoms. Two nation theory was not applicable to the princely Indian states as per the partition scheme. Two nation theory was applicable only to the 55% of the Indian territory that was the provinces. As far as the princely Indian states, the cabinet mission plan, which was reflected in the statutes that created modern day India, Pakistan, the Indian Independence Act of 1947, the Government of India Act of 1935 was amended. As per these laws, the ruler of the state could accede to India or Pakistan or stay independent. Religious complexion of the state was completely irrelevant. So, two nation theory, the whole premise of two nation theory fell through anyways when it was not even applicable to the entire subcontinent. It just did not make sense. And even if you see looking back, it is obviously fallacious. Religion could not keep West Pakistan and East Pakistan together. We are now have Bangladesh. India still continues to survive as one entity, and we have more Muslims in India than we have in Pakistan. So that takes us to the issue is if India had a secular tradition prior to the commencement of a constitution, if Indian leaders of undivided India were talking about we being one nation, including those leaders who later on talked about two nation theory, why did we have partition in the first place? Now, for that, one needs to go at it slightly diverged slightly away from what we've been taught in history books. During the course of my research on the Kashmir issue, I had the occasion of going through material on the declassified British archives. And those declassified British archives actually give a very different perspective as to what actually happened on the subcontinent. We have learned in our history books about the East India Company coming in as a trading partner, becoming a territorial power. I've just mentioned about the First War of Independence in 1857. That led to certain constitutional changes on the subcontinent. One, that ended the role of the East India Company, the British Crown took over. Then we had the first Government of India Act of 1858, so you had a viceroy on this subcontinent, and you had a Secretary of State in London who was these two individuals were actually governing the subcontinent. And of course, the third point is what I mentioned, that there was no further annexation of territory. The princely states could remain as princely states. Internally, the rulers were more or less sovereign, except when there were questions of succession, etc., where the British would intervene. Externally, they owed their allegiance to the British crown. We had the Indian National Congress being set up in 1885 to spearhead the freedom movement. In 1906, the then Prince of Wales visited India. And when he went back, he told his Secretary of State that the Congress has become a power, something needs to be done about it. It is at that point of time the Muslim League was formed, a Muslim Congress, to offset the influence of the Indian National Congress. Muslim Congress was actually formed in 1906 by Aga Khan, who had taken over from Sayyid Ahmad Khan. And in fact, at that time, you had the Viceroy was Minto, the Secretary was Morley, Secretary of State. So the college set up by Sayyid Ahmad Khan, that was which is now the Legal Muslim University, that was the Anglo Mohammedan Oriental College. The principals of that college, Archibald William, the principal of that college, facilitated a meeting of the Muslim League with the Viceroy, where for the first time the proposition which had been formed later by Aga Khan of separate electorates way back in 1883, that was became part of state policy. It was officially known later on as the Minto-Morley Reforms of 1909, the Indian Councils Act of 1909, which talked about state separate electorates for Hindus and Muslims. The leaders then in India were well aware of the divide and rule policy, but separate electorates actually meant that Hindus will vote for Hindus, Muslims will vote for Muslims, a sure way of tearing apart the society. I have examined the telegrams exchanged by the Secretary of State and the Viceroy, and the official British policy at that point of time was that while we, the British, did not create Hindu Muslim differences, we need to sharpen them. We need to communalize India. We need to communalize the entire polity. We need to break the secular tradition. In fact, in one telegram in 1925, um, the Viceroy has written to the Secretary of State saying that whatever bridge Gandhi is trying to build between Hindu Muslims, we're succeeding in breaking that down. So this was the official British policy that while we did not create Hindu Muslim differences, we must sharpen them to such a point that both Hindu and Muslim communities require us, the British, to stay here forever, so that we can be the ones who can be the composers, we're the ones who can lead to a compromise. So that was the British policy, which is documented by the British themselves in their own telegrams. So if somebody wants to go to the British archives, you can go and see there. Now, this policy took a different dimension with the outbreak of the Second World War in 1939. Britain and Germany were at war. Britain declared India to be at war. India said, why should we be at war? Nehru said that we might not support Nazism or Hitler, but why should we come to the rescue of a tottering imperialist power? So we will not. Why should India go to war and fight Britain's war? According to the British archives, it was at that time that the British decided to partition India, not in 1947. There was a reason for that. The British knew they would have to transfer power to Indian hands. The Indians, at that time, the Indian National Congress was leading the popular movement. The Indian National Congress was not cooperating in the war effort. Britain needed to have a separate sovereign state in view of its great game. Again, for those who are not initiated, a great game had been being played out for many decades and centuries between Britain and Soviet Russia. The British did not want the Russian influence to come southwards towards the Middle East, where you have the oil. And so, what they did was they devised many strategies to keep the British at bay. One of the strategy was to use Islam as the ideological boundary. So, if you see the world map, right from Turkey to China, there's Islamic belt. The northern frontier of colonial India was in this belt, what now coincides with Northwest Frontier Province, and basically Pakistan, and of course parts of Kashmir, Gilgit Baltistan. So that fell within the Islamic crescent. Since it was this area was Islamic, it was a British which encouraged the two nation theory. There is a telegram of 12th March 1940 sent by the Viceroy to the Secretary of State in London saying that I've asked my is a member in the Viceroy Council, Zafarullah Khan, to drop the memorandum on India, on the true dominance, India and Pakistan. And the transmit, of course, all the memorandum, etc., will be transferred, will be provided to the Muslim League. It was 10 days later that Jinnah declared the two nation theory at Lahore at Minto Park. The British wanted to create, they knew they would have to transfer power. They wanted to keep a slice of India. And that slice of India is what is now corresponds to what is now Pakistan. So that they could have a friendly and reliable defense outpost on the subcontinent for their own great game against Soviet Russia. And this is documented by the British themselves again, the memorandums of the Chief of Staffs, British Chief of Staffs, who say that our purpose will suffice if we have this strip of land. This Northwest Frontier, this Islamic crescent should not be broken, but we have the Northwest Frontier Province and so on and so forth. And of course, Northwest Frontier Province was not viable as a state. It's a hilly area, so you needed the fertile plains of West Punjab. And so Punjab had to be partitioned on the basis of two nation theory. Punjab had to be partitioned, so logical consequence would be the partition of Bengal, and so on and so forth. So that all that politics is there in my book, Unravelling the Kashmir Knot. I've documented from British archives, British documents, as to why the British did what they did. But the point of the matter is the partition of India, where 2 million people were butchered, 14 million displaced, the largest in history, and where we have transgenerational unending warfare going on till date, till 2021, was all because the British wanted a slice of land, a slice of India for its great game against Russia. I've documented in the book that Jinnah, who till 1938 was telling the Viceroy, I won't let you carve up the country, this was the one who was won over by the British to mount the two nation theory, use religion as a means of getting political power. He had been ignored by the Indian National Congress to a large extent. He was politically ambitious and barrister with no grassroots support. He was made the sole representative of Indian Muslims by the British so that he could veto any possible deal between the Hindu and Muslim community. And he is the one who then, for those of you who have read history, would have known that the way he declared on 27 July 1946 in Bombay that Muslim League will not be bound by constitutional methods and will take direct action, which meant communal killings. 16th August 1946 was the direct action day. The killing started from Calcutta. The British were colluding, of course. The British officers went into the barracks. The violence spread from Calcutta to Bihar to the entire subcontinent, forcing the Congress to eventually accept partition along the lines formed by the British. The British had already made a blueprint of partition. The 6th February 1946 telegram sent by the Viceroy to the Secretary of State, attaching the blueprint of partition, which is uh, identical to the Ratcliffe Award. So even Ratcliffe Award, according if you see the British archives, is again another farce imposed on the subcontinent. What was in the Ratcliffe Award was already sent to London 18 months earlier by the Viceroy to the Secretary of State. And then you had the 3rd June partition scheme, 3rd June 1947 partition scheme, partitioning the subcontinent, which was reflected in the British statutes, as I pointed out. But this narration will tell you that the Muslim League was a British construct, Pakistan was a British construct. In the process, the entire subcontinent, we are all the same people, all having the same secular tradition. The entire subcontinent has been taken for a ride, whether it's Pakistan, whether it's India, whether it's what is now Bangladesh. And what is even more unfortunate is that we are still, apart from not realizing that we've been taken for a ride by the British and the Western powers, we are still going down. We are still actually continuing with the communalization of the polity across the subcontinent. There has been a distortion of historical facts, distortion of the subcontinental identity, and this is even more pronounced in Pakistan. In fact, the Times of India had recently carried an article, Two Nation Theory, by Irfan Hussain. The original article was published in the Pakistani paper Dawn, and the author actually documents, and I can quote from his article, that the defenders of the so-called ideology of Pakistan have tried to establish the geographically untenable position that we are part of West Asia and not South Asia. To sustain this fiction, they have done their wicked worst to purge our culture of the subcontinental influences. Students are taught Arabic badly at an early age and indoctrinate to despise anything Indian. Another historian, Pakistan historian, Akbar Zaidi, had asserted in 2015 that history is taught in Pakistan from an ideological viewpoint, and he cites Pakistani textbooks which actually claim that Pakistan came into being in 712 AD when Arabs came to Sindh and Multan. Even Kasuri has, in his book, admitted that history as a subject receives very low priority in Pakistan. Either very little is taught to Pakistani children about early history of the subcontinent, or it is grossly misrepresented. The problem in Pakistan is further aggravated by the fact that not only have conscious efforts been made to tamper with history, but also to infuse ideology in the curriculum. So you have generations, children, the generations after generation, children being taught in school wrong history or facts are misrepresented, as a result of which the cultural tradition which has been on the subcontinent for centuries needs to be reclaimed. And perhaps one way of doing that is we could learn from the South African experiment of Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which was a quote like restorative justice body to basically heal the country. We need healing of the subcontinent to bring an end to the trauma of partition. You can't undo borders now, but you can make them peaceful. You can make them make people. You can have people to people contact. There needs to be a closure to the trauma because the subcontinental psyche has been disturbed by British colonial politics by creating artificial lines on the basis of religion. And for those who are interested, can go through the book where I've drawn parallels with what happened in India and what happened, for instance, with the disintegration of the Ottoman Empire. Identical colonial politics that show partition was scripted. As far as the Middle East is concerned, here we had East India Company, there you had Levant Company. Here you had the partition on religious lines, there you had partition or creation of new states on sectarian lines. Here, Pakistan and India, the subcontinent was divided into Pakistan and India. The Kuwait Palestine was cut out on sectarian lines. Here you had um, exchange of population between India and Pakistan. There you had between Greece and Turkey under the League of Nations. Here you have Jinnah, who was made the sole representative of Indian Muslims. There you have Sharif Hussain, who led the Arab Revolt. Identical colonial politics, few decades apart, which has led in artificial creation of countries and boundaries which are volatile till date, causing dehumanizing violence, human rights violations, misery, bloodshed, simply because of the petty colonial politics, that was ruthless colonial politics that was being played at that point of time. But on today, on the 72nd Republic Day, 72 years is not very. I mean, if you're looking at from even 1947, when we were still dominions of the British, we became a republic only 1950. 72 years is not very long in the history of an ancient civilization like India, where we've always maintained the secular tradition. So perhaps we need to get into different experiments how to reclaim the secular tradition. Otherwise, we will continue to fall prey to what has been um, prey to fall behind to the colonial legacy of divide and rule, two nation theory, and like the whole polity being communalized. So with that, I see it's already 4:51, and so then with that I'll close this lecture. Should anybody want to have some comments or ask some questions, please feel free to do so.
Sir, there is no more questions. Not at all.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.